With every single title in the Borderlands franchise, they have always had very similar inventory slots. 4 slots for guns the players can use, 1 for shields, 1 for character-specific class mods, and 1 for grenade mods. There is one clear outlier, however, and that is the artifact. Borderlands 1 had elemental artifacts that changed the element of the player's action skill. Borderlands 2 had relics, which gave general stat boosts to the player. Borderlands 3 continued the trend of Borderlands 2, but also added artifacts with special effects, such as sliding really fast and creating a snowball, shooting missiles out from a slam, and other types of special abilities. One game I did not mention was Borderlands the pre-sequel, as they took a different approach with their artifacts. They implemented an Oz kit. Although it had a pure stat boost like Borderlands 2, it also gave the players a mini jetpack, which allowed players to stay up in the air. It made the gameplay more dynamic and changed up the formula from just running around and killing things. They haven't implemented anything like this since then, and has made me wonder if Borderlands 4 should include a more movement-intensive based artifact. Today we're going to be talking about a new type of artifact that should be put into Borderlands 4. The first thing we should start with is... What the hell? Now you're probably wondering, Starkiller, what are you going to be doing for this more movement-intensive artifact? The answer is pretty simple. I want to include a grappling hook into Borderlands 4. Now, so many games have their own variations of grappling hooks that it is kinda hard to know what Gearbox should implement into their next Borderlands title. Lucky for them, I have made a breakdown of how the grappling hook should function. The first thing the grapple hook would allow the players to do is to give the ability to seamlessly transition between layers of a map. For example, let's say you are in an area and there is a ledge filled with enemies. The player would be able to grapple up to that point without needing to use stairs or a ladder. The grappling hook should also give players the ability to swing from one point to another. This would be done by having some form of anchor points around some of the maps. When hooked on to these anchor points, it would give the player free movement to spin wherever they need to. The third feature that should be added to the grappling hook is the capability of grabbing onto items. This list includes guns, shields, ammo, boosters, and other things of that nature. This would make it so that if you're in the middle of combat and need health or shields, you can use the grappling hook to pick up health vials and shield boosters respectively. If you run out of ammo mid-combat and there is some laying on the ground out of reach, you can easily get it with the grappling hook. Any loot that could be out of reach from the player can also be picked up. This feature overall would just make the flow of combat better as you're not running around to find ammo or health. The grappling hook would also be able to move barrels. This is more of a continuation of what Borderlands 3 did with allowing the player to melee barrels into people, but now you can just fling them into enemies. To be honest, I don't really know how balanced it is, but I think it would be really funny if the game actually included that. If not, it's not the end of the world. At least we have a grappling hook. Let's think about it like that, right? Last but not least is the grappling hook can attach to enemies. I will discuss this more in greater depth later on in the video, but for now all I will mention is that there will be a cooldown tied to the hook. Now that we have a good baseline on what a grappling hook will look like in Borderlands 4, what are the true benefits of adding it into the game? We will go over that in this next section. One thing I think Borderlands is missing within its combat design is the verticality of their maps. A lot of the areas you fight in are pretty flat with not a lot of depth. The only map I can think of off the top of my head is the toilet room in the Bloodshot Stronghold. Even then, that part of the map is super hard to traverse. The only means to get through the area is just going up ladders and running as fast as possible up some stairs. I think this is why there is not a lot of verticality in Borderlands map design. It is too unsafe for players to move around it. A grappling hook would fix this issue, as you would be able to move between floors without being severely punished. With this simple fix from the grappling hook, Gearbox could focus and make more combat areas with great depth and make each encounter feel more unique. Borderlands 3 somewhat helped with this vertical movement with mantling, but you can't move up too far with it, making mantling only good for outside parkour activities for secrets and stuff like that. Speaking of mantling, the addition of a grappling hook would strongly complement the movement tech in the newer titles. Borderlands 3 introduced a lot of new ways for players to move, which include sliding, mantling, and a slam. Although those options are good to have in a modern shooter, they felt incomplete, as if there was something missing to them. A grappling hook would elevate all of these different elements and make them more engaging for the player. For sliding, the player can launch off of an anchor point and then enter into the animation, building up crazy speed for them to get out of really sticky situations. The opposite of that situation can happen as well. While sliding, the player can grapple an enemy or a ledge and cancel the end of the slide, allowing them to be safe and possibly in a higher elevation. When it comes to mantling, the player can launch themselves super high and mantle onto a vantage point. It would also help with skips, as the player could grenade jump into a grapple into a mantle. This would be pretty cool for speedrunners to find cool skips and tech in the game. And finally, the slam would work similarly to the Oskit, as you would just fling yourself into the air and then slam onto the ground. Pretty self-explanatory. All of those reasons are in the context of combat scenarios, but what about the in-between? With the inclusion of grappling hook mechanics, Gearbox could do so many cool things in between each combat section, whether it is simple parkour or cool hidden secrets that need the grappling hook. There are endless opportunities to make the downtime more enjoyable for players. The final point I will mention is about the build diversity from the grappling hook. What do I mean by this? Let's start with...
My balls was hot. I understand.
Now we actually get to talk about the super cool part with the grappling hooks, and those are the different types. I came up with 3 unique versions of the hook that the player can use. The first type pulls the player into any type of enemy. Doesn't matter if it's a skag or a raid boss, they will go to that enemy. With this hook, players will be able to cancel the hook to launch themselves to other positions without needing an anchor point. For the cooldown of this hook, we will say it is about 10 seconds. Not saying that this is the most balanced, but it is something to refer to when talking about the other hook types. The second type is the complete opposite of the first type, and it allows the player to pull pretty much any enemy towards themselves. You can't pull raid bosses or bosses, unfortunately, but that would be too broken. Anything from badasses to below can be pulled towards the player. The bigger the enemy they pull, the longer it takes for the pull animation to end. The movement speed of the player is also slowed down based on what enemy they hooked. The cooldown would be around 15 seconds or so, let's say. Again, not for balancing purposes, but just for reference between each of the different types. The third and final type of hook is a combination of the previous 2 mentioned. The player is pulled towards bigger enemies just like Type 1, and pulls smaller enemies towards themselves just like Type 2. It seems like the best of both worlds. However, there are some things to mention about this specific type. The cooldown on the hook would be significantly larger at a staggering 30 seconds. This hook type definitely needs some more balancing, but I feel like having something that is good of many, master of none type of hook is something good to have in the game. With each of these hooks, they have their own benefits but also downsides to them. Type 1 is more movement based, which means you would not be able to do a lot of damage from it. Even if you hook straight to the enemy, you could put yourself into a dangerous situation where you could get killed. Type 2 is more meant to displace the enemy and deal crazy close range damage, but with the movement penalties tied to it, you could end up leaving the player in the same position for too long. The third type is the best of both worlds, but you have to use it way more cautiously due to the long cooldown. What I also like about these different types of hooks is the large amount of different setups you can do with them. For example, if you're doing a more long-range sniper character, then the Type 1 hook fits the bill, as you would be able to fling yourself to way farther positions than your enemy and then just lob shots at them. If you wanted to do crazy close-up damage to enemies, then Type 2 is best suited for that. Finally, if you're setting up your character to be very versatile in its gear, then Type 3 would meet those requirements, as it can do pretty much both of what Type 1 and Type 2 can do, but not as effectively. There is a time and place for all of these hooks, and it would add so much depth into the build making for the future Borderlands titles. And not only that, but also deepen the combat loop of Borderlands. Before I end the video, I think there's one more important point that needs to be mentioned when it comes to how the hook would tie to the artifact itself.
Some of them on there. Some of them on there.
The overall idea of the artifacts will stay similar to how they were in Borderlands 2 and so forth. They will have stat boosts to the player. What gets interesting is what happens within each rarity. With white artifacts, you will get a minimal bonus and you will only get one of the hook types attached to it. For green rarity artifacts, you would obviously have better stats than the white ones, but it will also give 2 different types of hook attachments, which can be switched in between. It could be a type 1 or type 2 artifact, a type 2 and type 3 artifact, or a type 1 and type 3 artifact. Before we go more in depth to the other rarities, I want to talk about this modular aspect of the grappling hooks. When I say they will be able to be swapped in between each other, once you select the artifact, there will be some type of indicator asking you which type of hook you want to use. You select that, and that will be the hook that you will use on that relic. If you ever want to change it, you would just have to go to the item and then double click on it in order to go and change its hook type. Anyway, let's continue back with the other rarities. For blue and purple artifacts, they will have the ability to switch in between all 3 types. The only difference between blue and purple rarity is how good the stats are on each of the relics. With this system in place, it makes it so that early game you are not destroying every enemy you see, but later on you start to get the ability to experiment with all these different types of hooks. Now finally, we have the legendary artifacts. They will have only one of the hook types on them, but they will have a special effect that is tied with them. With these legendary artifacts, they will also have stat boosts that would correlate with the artifact special ability. I have made some examples, but they aren't fully developed yet. So I'm just going to kind of go in order of the different types of hooks and give somewhat of a general idea of what a legendary artifact would look like. Starting with type 1, we have the meat hook, which, if you could already take a guess, is from Doom Eternal. Now how this would work is simple. The player would pull themselves towards any enemy like normal, but when they're pulling towards them, the enemy gets marked for a 5-second duration. When they are marked and you do damage towards them, you will get shield boosters that will drop from the enemy. And you can use those to obviously, well, replenish your shield. The stats with this relic would probably also boost fire damage just because of it being Doom Eternal, and the meat hook in that game has fire damage on it. Now looking at the second type, we have the chain hook, which is a reference to Roadhog from Overwatch 2, or just Overwatch in general, whatever game. Now this one's a little bit more tricky to actually figure out a specific special effect for, but the ones I could think of was giving the player more degrees of movement when displacing the enemy, so they would be able to put them to their left or right, similar to how it works in Overwatch. And whenever they pull the enemy towards them, a small shock trap would apply to the ground, dealing some damage to the enemies. And then I think a good stat boost to have with it is just some shock damage. And then finally for type 3, we have the whiplash hook, which is actually a reference to Ultra Kill. Now, it kind of works similarly to the Doom hook, but instead of actually giving you shield boosters, it would actually give a small percentage of lifesteal, because in the game of Ultra Kill, when you go close to enemies and you shoot them, you get healing back because of all the blood you absorb. For the stat bonus, I don't really know anything to actually put here, but I would probably either say swap speed or a reload speed bonus would be pretty good to add with this artifact. Hopefully that gave a good explanation of how the legendary artifacts would work with the grappling hook mechanics and their special effects. It is kind of hard to come up with a good proper example because, you know, they're not in the game yet, or even in the discussion of being in the game. But I just wanted to give something to help visualize what I'm talking about.
Oh, it's over!
And that's all I really have to say about the grappling hook feature that they could add in a future Borderlands title. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I had a total blast making this and actually thinking of what a grappling hook would look like in Borderlands 4 or any Borderlands title. I would like to give a huge thanks to Fierce Chimera for helping me flesh out a lot of these ideas for the grappling hook. We had a long discussion about it a while back, and it's been taking me so long because you know my upload schedule. I barely upload, but I finally was able to get to it, and thanks to him I was able to make some very solid points and to actually articulate what I really wanted to say. He also helped with getting me some gameplay footage for this video. So if you guys are for some reason not subscribed, please go into the description. His channel will be there. Please go subscribe. He makes really good Borderlands content. Thank you guys for watching. If you want, you can leave a like, you can subscribe, but if you don't want to, that is perfectly fine. But I do appreciate you guys for at least watching the video. Anyways, I'll talk to you later. See ya.